Hello and good evening, and welcome to Varsity Maine Live for the Portland Press Herald. I'm Travis Lazarzik, and this is going to be an almost all-exclusive football episode of Varsity Maine Live because that's the only sport we have left going in Maine. Tonight, I'm joined by Steve Craig of the Portland Press Herald and from the Sun Journal, Adam Robinson. Our guest tonight is the head coach of Oxford Hills. He'll have one of those teams playing in the state championships on Saturday afternoon at Fitzpatrick Stadium. In the first time since 1999, Oxford Hills will be in it. Please welcome from Oxford Hills, Mark Soehren. Coach, thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Your team's been kind of building to this for a few years now. We've seen the Vikings improve a little bit here and there till finally now you're ready to challenge for a state title. What can you just say about the building process of, creating this opportunity for your team?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a process, right? And in 2018, when we had regions still, we played in the regional final, lost in overtime. And that was sort of the point where we got into being competitive and being able to win some of these games and hopefully getting that point. We'd always sort of set these small goals in front of us. One was just making playoffs. When I took over the year before, we had one win. I think the year before that, it was 0 wins, if not one. So we had said, okay, let's win some more games. I think my first year we won 3, then we regressed a little bit and won 1. And so it was back and forth. And I can't remember if it was my 3rd or 4th year, we finally made playoffs, and we went away. I think it was up to Bangor, and they took it to us pretty well. And, but it was a step. And so each year is talking about hosting a game and, winning a home game and, and ultimately hosting a regional final. I know that technically it's not regional final, but I like to call it a regional final since it feels more, more championship-y. But, and we were able to do that and get a win.
Yeah. Hey, I wanted to this is a quick question. I should have asked you this week. Have you ever beaten Thornton?
No, never beaten Thornton. In fact, this year coming in, the only 2 teams that I personally haven't beaten is Thornton and Scarborough. And then we had the Scarborough game canceled and it's still yet to beat Thornton.
And it's worth noting that you did beat Bonnie Eagle, the other kind of big baddie, twice this year. So I think more of the question I wanted to ask, you and I talked about this a little bit, Mark. It is a different week, more. I mean, you're talking to us tonight, and I'm feeling a little worn out at this point in the season. How do you make sure your kids stay fresh and are really ready to go on Saturday?
Well, when you get in, we had the bye week, which was nice, and you can limit your time. And I gave them a day off as well, 2 days off actually, and you try and you try and get those kids to just understand the process. And we would also try and, we're not conditioning. We try to go a little bit shorter with practices as we go. But the truth is, when you have a team like this, and I think it's true of Thornton Academy, I think it's very true of Bonnie Eagle type teams, Levis and those, is they just expect to be here. That's not, sometimes when I've had teams in the past, when that you're up against it in a playoff game, and you're a 7 seed and as coaches, you're cheering them. You're like, we got that. We can go and do this. Let's go compete. And the kids kind of know, like, man, I'm not sure how this is going to go. They're kind of ready to turn in the pads, and this group's not ready. I mean, I think this group would continue to practice. Today's practice, we went a little bit longer than I'd like, and they were fine. So I haven't had to do much for this team this year.
Excellent. So that's interesting. They have whether it works out or not for you on Saturday, it sounds like you believe they have a championship mentality.
Yeah, and they've shown that. I think even in the game we played earlier, that, I mean, when you turn the ball over 5 times in one quarter, it's hard to come back from that. And it didn't matter. They just, those kids just came back and played and gave themselves a chance in the end. And that's sort of, I feel like, I know that's the only time we've been down and sort of under the gun, but that's the sort of team this is. Just the score is one thing, but they're playing football, and that's what they want to
do. Mark, I talked to your son Atticus, who was your quarterback last year in the 7-on-7 year and the year before, and I talked to him about him going to college for track, but I also mentioned if he's keeping tabs on his brother Eli and this year's team, and I asked him about, because you and I had talked during the summer during the funky Lobster Bowl 7-on-7 tournament, and you said that you thought last year's team was the team that was going to do what this year's team is doing. And so I asked Atticus who he thought was the better team, and he thinks this year's was a little bit better than last year's. What do you think's the biggest difference between what you may have had last year and this season here?
Well, it's been, I think I've been coaching football now for close to 20 years, and each class, it doesn't matter who you had in front or who was behind, they have their own personality and they sort of lead the team in that way. And Atticus's class had some talent. They weren't as deep as these two classes that I have now. I think we had 9 or 10 in that class, but they were pretty high quality players. But they had always been sort of they'd been on the winning side of things, but always a second. I think Lewiston had taken to in our league, and in the times they'd lost to Lewiston, they'd lose on a kick return for a touchdown, and these things that I always call them what ifs. I felt like that senior class, always thought, well, what if they pick me off, or what if they do return a kick return, or what if that kid's playing, and I said to the kids, those what ifs aren't real. They don't exist. They're only there in your brain. You've got to come out and play. And I think that was the one thing that was sort of, I don't know if it's holding it back, but that was one of the things that made that class a little bit more nervous. Even when they were juniors and we played Bonnie Eagle, we were very competitive. That's the year Bonnie Eagle won state championship, and we weren't as good as Bonnie Eagle, but we took them right to the wire. And so they were capable of doing some great things. But these, I think Atticus is right. This team is deeper. It's better. We're bigger, and the overall speed is faster. It would have been interesting with the juniors as sophomores. I don't know how many played. When we weren't very good, we had a number of sophomores that started for us. And one of the goals was to not have sophomore starters. It's just hard for sophomores to start in Class A football. And so, but that class is deep, and they're big and they're fast. So, or I should say they're tall and they're fast. They're not hefty, but they're tall and fast. And so I think we would have had a fair amount of depth with that group as well. I don't know what the other teams were like in the league, but I know that, Atticus was a pretty good quarterback. Eli and Wyatt Knightley were his backups. At that point, I don't know who would have been 2 and 3, and we had Addison Brown, who was a great receiver, and Tyler Blond, and we had some big linemen that were really athletic. So, I'll never get over us not playing it, not just because of my son, but because that was, one of those things that we missed out on, and someone pointed out the other day, for me, my own personal record, which I think I'm getting close to 500 now. I don't know what it is, but that would have been some nice wins for me, I think. So, but this team just has both the juniors and the seniors have a different mentality, and I do have a number of sophomores playing. There's some very talented sophomores on my team that aren't playing. That would probably started for every single team I've ever had.
Coach, I'd like to just pivot a little bit and talk about Maine high school football in general. We've seen the 8-man league more than double in size from 10 the first season in 2019 to, I think, 24 schools this year. Class A is down to 8 schools?
Yep.
Class D has 9. What are some of the issues you think need to be addressed in Maine high school football in the offseason?
Well, I'm not sure this is broadcast long enough for my opinions on all this, but I'll try to keep it short. I think 8-man's great for football, especially in a state like Maine, in a bigger state with rural. I think it's a great thing for it. And I also do think, with the way the state of football is in Maine, that there are developing programs, right? And there's some ups and downs with programs. And I do think 8-man is appropriate for a number of those programs, even though they're larger schools. I think that the alternative is if there's no football. And I think that's a bad alternative for the kids of the state. So, but at some point, the state of Maine and I guess the MPA is going to have to figure out a way to really regulate who's in that and who comes out. And there's no real easy answer for that, because you could say, and I know there's a little controversy with Chevrolet and the 40-man roster and such. So let's say you limited roster sizes. Are you going to encourage football teams to cut then? Say you're 1 over and you can't compete. Are you going to encourage that? You're going to not let that kid participate? I mean, one of the things I like about football, it's a no-cut sport. So I think that 8-man is a great problem to have. Now, when we get to 11-man, I think some of those probably larger schools, they've had success now, and their rosters up. I mean, I will say, I think Waterville had, I don't know what, 15 kids, not very many, right? I mean, that's an appropriate place for them. But if you have some of those larger rosters and larger populations, as a coach, you got to get in there and get more kids out. You got to create a booster program that encourages it. And sometimes it's not doing what everyone else is doing. In Oxford Hills, and I didn't come up with this, my assistant coach did, and Ted Moshe before him. We're all in-house. We have 4 third and fourth grade teams, sometimes 5. We have 4 fifth and sixth grade teams, and they play each other, and they have their own playoff and championship. And we have a lot of kids in the program, and it keeps kids in the program, and all those kids play. If we combine those 4 teams into one, now you got 1 quarterback instead of 4. I think there's ways to find ways for kids to win or to participate. I think that's the case. Now, with Class D and Class A, I think that was just, I don't know. That was wrong. It was wrong what happened when they did reclassification. And, there's a ton of teams in Class B and a ton of teams in Class C that could be in Class A and be in Class D. I mean, I don't know if you've seen, but I know Sun Journal did a story where they took some of the stuff that I've given to the MPA. I've gone to a few meetings. I communicated with them. I don't think I'm the end all be all. I'm just trying to. It's easy to sit on the sidelines and complain, right? It's easy to point out problems and who's going to help solve? They don't want to take my ideas. I'm perfectly fine with that, but at least I'm going to try to be part of the solution with it. So, I don't know what they're going to do with Class A. We are a better program with having played Bonnie Eagle and Scarborough and Thornton Academy. I mean, there's no way we're at this point if we hadn't played those teams. So, I know some of the teams, some of the Portland teams wanted to reclassify because they wanted to take a school out of their population. Well, that's nice that they had that opportunity to have that school in their district, but most of us don't have that. I've got a tech school, and I can tell you there are some big kids not playing football at Oxford Hills. And you know what they're doing? They're working. They're logging. They're wearing those boots, and they're in the woods, and they're cutting down trees. And I understand that. That's where their priorities are. So if I took the tech school off of my population, which they typically don't play, I do have a few. That'd knock us down. And I just don't. But I don't think that's the way to go. So I think when we start looking at reclassification, I don't know. I don't know what the MPA is going to do. I think, though, having 8 teams in Class A probably isn't the right thing, and having 9 in Class D probably isn't the right thing.
So 3 classes instead of 4 going forward?
I think if you've got 8-man classes, I think that 3 is very reasonable. And, it's hard. I am also a fan of acknowledging kids and winning championships. I understand that, but five classes in Maine, even though our population is bigger, like I grew up in the Midwest in North Dakota and such, there's more football teams in North Dakota with half the population. Well, it's a little different culturally, football wise, out there. So, in Maine, you've got 70 some. In North Dakota, you have over 100. South Dakota, I think, is a little bit less. But you just got to find some equitable ways. And some teams that are, that are on the edge are going to come up to Class A, and they're going to struggle a bit. And when I look at some of what other states have done, and I do think Maine at some point has got to look at some of the other states have done, is that those teams that are in the, let's just say Class A, and you went down to 800. So 800 to 950 you're going to have some great teams every year out of those groups. Every year is going to have at least one of those teams going to be great. It's just not going to be the same team every year. I understand Thornton's coming back and Bonnie Eagle, and it'd be nice if Oxford Hills, but we're probably going to have some ups and downs for our programs as it goes. But there's always going to be some good teams in there. It's just that sometimes those teams at 750, they're going to end up third or fourth in Class A. They might have won Class B, but that's just not what's in the best interest of Maine football.
Hey, great answers, and I've always appreciated your thoughts on this. But one thing we haven't mentioned is too many of the guys on your team. This kid Eli Soren. He seems to be pretty good. Tell us what I mean, and you put a lot on him too. Just give us a sense of what's made him maybe the best quarterback in the state this year.
Well, I always credit his older brother with his development. When they were younger, this I've said this many times with my teams, and thinking about how do you become a competitor? Because as a coach, what I've learned is you can't really control winning and losing, but you can control how you compete. And so when Eli was younger and he'd go against Atticus, he let's just use basketball. It's a little more concrete. Atticus wanted to beat his brother and focused on winning. And if he lost, it was a disaster. Elias could not beat Atticus. It was not happening. So Atticus, at the beginning, Eli just wanted to get a shot off, which wasn't very often in the beginning. So Eli was focused on getting a shot off, and Atticus was focused on winning. And that sort of went. And once Eli got a shot off, then he was focused on making the shot. And then he was focused on making a move. And so this sort of process, and he just loved competing. He just loved playing against his brother, even though he wasn't winning. But he wasn't focused on winning and losing. He was just focused on playing and competing and getting better. And I don't know if it's his brain or if it was developed that way. But now, when you talk to him about stuff, he has no idea what his stats are. He does not care about individual awards. He just wants to play with his teammates, and he just can't wait to play against the best teams. And wish I could tell you I did something there. I didn't. And so he just sort of was that way. He sort of came up that way. And so I think that's the piece that has been good, and I want to tell kids that he's probably the most coachable kid I've ever coached. And I don't think it's easy being a coach's kid. I mean, when I get mad and I don't want to yell at someone else, Eli gets yelled at. So he just takes it and he just lets it go. And I think, well, that's probably more mature than I'm being when I'm yelling at him. And so he's able to sort of take coaching, take what you're saying. He's not concerned about how you say it so much. And he plays. And I think that's what has allowed him to be successful. And the other thing is he has a lot of fun. I think like the biggest piece for, if I said like all these kids out there, make sure it's fun. And so I think that's been his development, and I've got to see it for many years. So, putting him in a quarterback, I figured he'd be pretty good. I mean, I watched him come up and he's been a pretty good player. I didn't know he'd quite the season he would have this year.
Right. And Eli's got a few options to go to. He's got Tegan Pelletier, really tall wide receiver. He's got Matt Doucette, and then Isaiah Alfaro, who I wrote about and learned a lot about when I wrote about him. And he's a tough football player. Is this the most, you talked about it, I think you mentioned it a little bit ago, but is this the most depth you've had on offense?
Oh yeah, it's not even close. I mean, I've got 3 sophomore kids that are really good offensive players that don't see the field. I've got 3 juniors that sub in, that would have been maybe some of the best players I've had on a team. They're sitting behind Matt and Isaiah. I mean, Eli's not, those numbers he has are in large part to the kids he's throwing to. Even in practice today, you're just amazed at some of the things the kids do. You throw it up to Tegan in the end zone, and he's just so athletic and tall, and he just goes and gets. You can't defend it, And then there's Matt, who's just so quick. We put some plays in to make sure he can move in space, and then you've got Isaiah, who's so strong and deceptively fast that it's hard to cover him with. You don't know who. Like if you got a smaller guy, he's so strong, and then if you got a bigger guy, he's quick. So there's no question. And Eli, and the other thing that Eli trusts all those kids. he doesn't care who he throws it to.
Okay, great discussion. Coach, thanks for joining us in what has got to be a busy week for you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's been exhausting, but it's been a privilege.
It's always nice to practice when the sun's going down, right?
That's right.
All right. Mark Soehren from Oxford Hills, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Mark.
Okay. We'll now move on to Athletes of the Week, and we're going to start with the lone non-football player, Ruth White, Orono Cross Country. She's a sophomore. She completed an undefeated season Saturday by winning the New England High School Cross Country Championship in Thetford, Vermont. She ran the 5-kilometer course in 18 minutes, 44.73 seconds, finishing 23 seconds ahead of the runner-up. And she wasn't the only Mainer who did well there. 5 Maine girls finished among the top 8, including Hadley Mahoney of Cape Elizabeth, who was 4th, followed by York's Carrie Drake and Bonnie Eagle's Delaney Hessler. Thea Crowley of George Stevens Academy placed 8th. From Dexter football, Bryce Connor and Avery Gagnon, they connected Connor to Gagnon on the game-winning touchdown pass as time expired to give the Dexter Tigers a 34-30 win over Maranacook in the 8-man small school championship game. Richie Tremble from Chevers football, he had 2 interceptions in the Stags' 56-0 win over Waterville in the 8-man large school division game. Chevers finished the season with 5 consecutive shutouts. Nick Garrison from Wyndham football, he lines up in a lot of different spots. He caught the game-winning touchdown, and he also returned a surprise onside kick, 65 yards for a score in Wyndham's 42-35 overtime regional final win over Lawrence. Dominic Trott from Winthrop Monmouth Halldale football, he scooped up an onside kick attempt and returned it 51 yards for a touchdown late in the fourth quarter, securing the Class D semifinal victory for the team against Freeport. Trott also ran for 2 touchdowns and gained 62 yards on 8 carries. On defense, he intercepted a pass and made 9 solo tackles. He had 13 tackles overall. Cody Ruff from Thornton Academy football, senior outside linebacker and blocking end. Ruff was a disruptive force on defense despite playing with his left hand wrapped up like a club to protect torn tendons. In the fourth quarter of his Thornton's 29-12 Class A semifinal win against Scarborough, Ruff had a key tackle for a loss and batted down 2 passes at the line of scrimmage. Caden Mcduffie from Cape Elizabeth football, the senior quarterback, was the focal point of the Capers' grinding ground game with 21 carries for 76 yards and 2 touchdowns, including the game winner on 4th down with 3 seconds to play in Cape's 25-22 win at number 1 Levitt in the Class C South Final. His lone completion in 3 attempts was a 69-yard touchdown to Nick Laughlin. Dayton Calder from Levitt football. Calder had a 39-yard touchdown run and caught a 51-yard pass in Levitt's 25-23 loss to Cape in that final on Saturday. Andrew Goodwin of Marshwood football. This senior fullback ran for 4 touchdowns and 134 yards in the Hawks' 35-0 B South regional final win against undefeated Portland. Eli Soren, who we were just talking about from Oxford Hills, he threw 4 touchdown passes and had a 46-yard touchdown run in the Vikings' 34-7 Class A semifinal win over Bonnie Eagle on Saturday. He completed 15 of 23 passes for 176 yards, and he also ran for 156 yards on 21 carries. Finally, Will Ledbetter of Wyndham football, senior quarterback, was spot on in a 42-35 win against Lawrence, completing 14 of 22 passes for 234 yards and 5 touchdowns. 2 of those touchdown passes coming in overtime. So congratulations to all this week's Athletes of the Week. We have 1 poll left, gentlemen. It's the football poll put together by Bob Obie, who thankfully always reminds us to get it in. I had forgotten and got mine in this afternoon. Thornton Academy, no surprise, remains number 1. Oxford Hills, no surprise, remains number 2. Marshwood, coming off their upset win over Portland in the regional final last week, goes up to 3. Wyndham's 4. Cape Elizabeth is 5. Real quickly, starting with you, Steve, anything jump out at you from last week's regional finals or 8-man championship games?
Well, I covered the Thornton win against Scarborough, and then actually had something to do with friends that had nothing to do with work. So I did not look at Twitter or anything until Sunday afternoon after I'd done some chores. I was flabbergasted, just freaking shocked by that 35-0 Marshwood win over Portland. Not shocked that Marshwood won. We talked about that last week, that they could upset them, but 35-0. I just couldn't believe it. What an improvement their defense has had over the last 2 weeks. 3 weeks, I guess, technically. But, they gave up 42 points in the regular season final against Kennebunk. 2 weeks later, when they played Kennebunk again, they cut that in half down to 21, and then to shut out an unbeaten team at Portland.
Adam, you saw that crazy long drive that Cape Elizabeth put together for that win over previously undefeated Levitt, right?
Yeah, I was at that game. And that final drive, I mean, Levitt punts it, Cape gets it on their own, I think 42. So not even 60 yards away with 10:03 left on the clock. And they just go 2 yards, 3 yards, 4 yards. They get a first down and then a hold. So they have a little bit more to go. And they just kind of keep going and going. And they get to about the 20-yard line. And I look up and there's like 4 minutes left. And I'm like, wow, this has been a long drive. And they get 10 more yards and there's about 2 minutes left. And somehow they just kept the clock moving. And one thing that was pointed out to me the other day was that Levitt might be one of the only fields that has a play clock on each side of the field. And so you're not guessing how much time you have left. You can actually see how much time is left on the play clock. And so Cape ran it down until the end and then ran up the middle with Caden Mcduffie, like we said. Nick Laughlin, a really strong and fast, powerful back. And then Colin Campbell, who was running on a partially torn MCL, I guess, but he just kept it moving. Just a really impressive drive, impressive Cape team. And I felt bad for Levitt. They lost Jack Bouton in the second quarter. They're really good linemen on both sides of the ball. He dislocated his elbow and had to go to the hospital, actually. If he's there, I don't know if that drive happens, but credit to Cape. They did what they had to do. They kept the ball out of Levitt's hands, who can score really fast, and they got the job done. So it was an impressive Cape team and an impressive win. It was a really fun game to be at.
Okay. Let's look at this weekend's 4 state championship games really quick, starting with Friday night at Cameron Stadium in Bangor, the Class D game. We have Winthrop Monmouth Halldale 7-1 versus 10-0 Foxcroft. Winthrop's lone loss was a 24-14 loss at Foxcroft just a few weeks ago. Going back to you, Adam, you've probably seen this Winthrop Monmouth Halldale team more than either Steve or I. What do they got to do to beat Foxcroft in this rematch?
Well, they can break off really long runs. We're showing the picture right now. I did a story on both their offensive and defensive lines. It's going to come out tonight. They put a lot of emphasis on their lines, but when they played Foxcroft in the regular season, 2 weeks before the playoffs started, Foxcroft took it to them, and their Foxcroft line took over. They stopped the run game from Winthrop, which is their bread and butter usually. And they scored early and often. I think they had a 17-0 halftime lead. So Winthrop knows that they kind of came out flat. At least the players admit that they came out kind of flat. They won't, I wouldn't think, tomorrow come out with that kind of low energy. So I think it'll be really fun. Foxcroft, Austin Seavey, the quarterback, and Caden Crocker, the wide receiver, is as good a combo as there is in the state. They're really two really good athletes. So that should be a fun game, and I think another really close one up in Bangor.
Okay. The other 3 games are all going to be at Fitzpatrick Stadium in Portland on Saturday, beginning at 11 a.m. with the Class A game, Steve. Thornton 10-0, Oxford Hills 8-1. You saw that first game, right? 31-23 Thornton with a lot of Oxford Hills turnovers.
6 turnovers, yeah, as Coach mentioned, and most of them were in the first half. This is a toss-up for me. It feels like every time I try and decide, you think about the 6 turnovers, you go, well, there's no way they're going to turn it over 6 times. And 2 of them went back for touchdowns, and a fumbled kickoff basically gave them a field goal. So there's 17 of Thornton's points. But on the other hand, everybody seems to think that it's going to be a 4-quarter battle. If it is a 4-quarter battle, I feel like that's where Thornton's depth, because so few of their key guys actually play both ways, may be a positive factor for them. And as great as Eli Soren has been this year, so much is relying upon him, both in their run game, their pass game. He's their kicker, their punter. He starts at free safety. Not saying he can't do it, but that's why I'm picking Thornton.
Okay. Second game on Saturday at Fitzpatrick Stadium, Class B, Marshwood 8-3 versus Wyndham 9-0 at 2:30 in the afternoon. I haven't seen Marshwood. I've seen Wyndham a couple times, and they just keep finding ways to win these close games. Beat Skowhegan 7-6 in the regional semifinal. Double overtime win over Lawrence last week. Nick Garrison, who I wrote about this week, just has a knack for making big plays on both sides of the ball and on special teams with the onside kick return for a score. It's just going to be interesting to see if Wyndham's, hey, we've been in close games this whole run, stands up to a Marshwood team that's just got to be playing with a lot of confidence after winning 2 playoff games on the road against teams that they had lost to in the regular season. Steve,
I give Marshwood the edge here, and a lot of it is my perceived my perception that they played a much tougher schedule in B South, and then they also played Thornton Academy. They've been tested. They've had to beat 2 teams that beat them in the regular season, where Wyndham kind of escaped beating those teams a second time, teams that they had beaten during the regular season. But where you haven't seen Marshwood, I haven't seen Wyndham, and so I may be sort of underselling Wyndham as a bit too. I think this could be a really good game as well. I really think that the A and the B games should be very entertaining. And I feel like Wyndham's going to have to score at least 28 points to win this game.
That could be, yeah. And the last game of the day, last game of the season, Cape Elizabeth 9-1 versus Winslow 7-2. That game's at 6:00 on Saturday night at Fitzpatrick Stadium. I've seen Winslow quite a bit in the past. I haven't seen him a lot at all this year. Both losses came to teams that Cape beat pretty easily in the regular season. Crossover games against Southern teams York and Wells. Like you said about Marshwood, Steve, I just feel like maybe Cape Elizabeth's played a much tougher schedule than Winslow, and that could be a difference. And Adam, you saw Cape Elizabeth grind out a long scoring drive last week, but they can really score in a lot of different ways, can't they?
Yeah, but I mean, I saw their first game with Levitt in the regular season, and they went strike for strike with Levitt's offense. They can score a 60-yard touchdown just as easily as they do a 6-7 minute drive. And they turned the ball over, I think, 3 times in that regular season game, and that may have been the difference in that first Levitt game, which Levitt won. Didn't turn over the ball in the Levitt game in the playoffs. Long drive, got the win. And I think you're right, Travis, that the strength of schedule, I think, has something to do with it. Cape has taken care of a lot of the teams that they've come across, and they slayed the dragon that is Levitt. And I thought if Levitt could get by Cape, then I didn't think anybody was going to be touching them. So I kind of have to feel the same way about Cape here.
Yeah, here's my stat of the week, okay?
Go for it.
Winslow, Wells High, always a good team, but not a great team this year by any means. Went up to Winslow on October 2nd and beat Winslow 49-13. 2 weeks later, Wells goes to Cape Elizabeth on artificial turf, which is where they'll be playing on turf on Saturday. Cape beat Wells 69-0.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
That kind of tells the whole story. That's kind of how I was thinking about that Cape and Levitt playoff game. Right.
Yeah. But you know what? As Sean Green, the Cape coach, said to me this week, we've never won a state championship, and Winslow has won a bunch of them, and they've been there a lot. And their coaching staff, the 2 co-coaches, Pete Balduck and Wes Littlefield, are longtime assistants at Winslow under Mike Savitsky. Winslow has probably as deep a football tradition as almost anybody in the state, right, Travis?
Oh, yeah, there's something to be said for that.
Yeah, and I didn't get around to asking Mark Soehren this, but he said that is an advantage that Thornton will have in the Class A game, is that Thornton has 25 seniors, and probably most of them at least were there in 2019, maybe not playing. I think a handful of them did see some roles, like Cody Ruff, and actually junior Isaiah Jones, I believe, was a starter in the defensive secondary as a freshman. And obviously Coach Kevin Kiesel of Thornton has already won, I believe, 4 state championships since 2012, if I'm remembering correctly. And Mark was pretty honest, which a lot of coaches I don't think would have said this. He said, yeah, that's an advantage. They've all been there before. They know what it's like. And Mark said he actually had reached out to Matt Perkins, the Wyndham coach, who's had 3 of his teams reach the state final before this year, just to kind of, pick his brain. What do we need to do this week? How do we need to treat it? And So, but boy, I can't. I just keep coming back to how Oxford Hills was still in that game, outgained Thornton despite 6 turnovers. So I don't know. That Thornton
It's going
gets
to be a fun Saturday.
You go back to. I've got all this information I want to get at. Two other things about that Class A game.
Yep.
Isaiah Jones did not play in the first game. He is healthy and it's a full go, and he is an impact player, especially in the punt return and in the secondary. And it's on artificial turf, where I don't know whether that will be a factor. But if it is, it's got to be in Thornton's advantage because they play on turf.
Definitely.
Right.
Okay. Well, that's going to do it for us this week on Varsity Maine Live. We're going to take some time off because of the holidays and the fact that there's just no sports going on for a few weeks. We'll be back December 9th to talk about the winter sports season that'll be getting underway. Since we're going to take some time off, I feel like we need a cliffhanger or something. So I'm back December 9th to learn where Steve hid the gold. All right, that's going to do it. Thanks for watching. Please check out Varsity Maine for all your high school sports info. For Adam, for Steve, for Coach Soren, I am Travis. Thanks for joining us this week on Varsity Maine Live.